Yeah,
Well,
we'll just say briefly that this is a video about Walter Slage, the inventor of Slage lock. We're showing it because it has a strong relationship to, well, Walter Slage and Slage lock as a product has a strong relationship to Visitation Valley. And as members of the Visitation Valley History Project, we're always trying to preserve, promote, collect the history of the neighborhood. So we'll show the video and just have a little bit of commentary at the end.
okay, Roland.
Whenever you're ready.
In July 1926, the Schlage Lock Company was months from bankruptcy. Customer demand was not the problem. Keeping up with it was. In the first year, factory output grew from 400 locks a month to 20,000. That sounds phenomenal, but few companies have a plan for handling that kind of growth. Schlage was overextended, and everyone could see it wasn't working. Walter Schlage was running out of chances, and his beloved company was one wrong decision away from becoming a cautionary tale of how a company can still fail, despite having a perfect idea at the perfect time with the power to change an industry for generations to come. Growing up in Roda, Germany, at the height of the Industrial Revolution, Walter Schlage and his father often went on trips to the nearby Carl Zeiss Optical Works factory. There they witnessed the creation of machinery with unprecedented precision, meticulous detail, and technical wizardry. Walter joined the Zeiss company as an apprentice at age 14 and graduated with academic recognition in the factory's engineering department. Despite his success, his childhood dream of travel beckoned, so he left Germany at age 18. Over the next 5 years, Walter traveled 23,000 miles and held at least 5 different jobs. In 1906, Walter was 23 years old and had settled himself in San Francisco. He found a job in the telephone repair department of the Western Electric Company. 4 months later, a catastrophic earthquake struck the city. More than 3,000 people were killed. 28,000 buildings were destroyed. And 225,000 people were left homeless. Walter survived, as did the California Electrical Works building in which he worked. But his home did not. He was forced to piece together a shelter from iron scraps and wood, measuring a modest 6 feet by 8 feet. It had no windows, no floor, and just one door. He would live in that shanty for a year. As time went on and the city recovered, Walter put down roots. He started a family, took night classes in electrical engineering, and rented a small workshop for his experiments. He had a talent for noticing problems hidden in plain sight. For example, when entering a darkened room, you would have to find the switch in the dark to turn on the lights. Walter reasoned that if you turn a knob to open the door, then that knob should automatically turn on the lights too. So he bought a lock, wired it to a switch, and patented his first invention. Despite its creativity, the light switch lock had one downfall. It had a tendency to shock people. Walter himself would receive many jolts before ultimately scrapping the idea. But he had taken a pivotal step in his journey. He had purchased a lock. Walter now turned his attention in a new direction.
I was keenly interested in the development of patentable devices which could be commercially produced, utilizing mass production principles. Practically all of my spare time was directed towards such problems.
At that time in the early 1900s, mass production was not common in factories. But Walter realized that how you build is just as important as what you build. While in his workshop, he spotted another problem, hidden in plain sight. Doorknobs inside rooms still needed the key to unlock them. If you misplaced the key, you would be locked in. Walter reasoned that since the doorknob opens the door, Perhaps the knob should also unlock it. In 1917, he patented a lock that worked by actually tilting the knob. Tilt up to lock the door, and back down to unlock it. Walter had created a lock that not only worked, but improved on the previous design. And this time, he would not abandon his invention. In 1918, he left Western Electric to turn his experiments into his livelihood, introducing his tilting knob lock to the world. However, without a steady income, the clock was ticking. Walter had his invention and his patent, but if he wanted to manufacture it, he needed money. Joseph Roig was a speculative builder doing well in the post-World War I construction boom. After an invitation to meet Walter and visit his shop, Joseph saw the potential in building houses that featured this new and innovative lock, and their business partnership began. Joseph started raising capital and organizing the business, while Walter developed the manufacturing equipment. On August 23, 1920, the Schlage Manufacturing Company was officially created. It was Joseph's idea to name the company after Walter, a fitting tribute to a revolutionary inventor. While preparing the tilting knob lock for mass production, Walter began to look for other ways to improve on the mortise lock. Common mortise locks had many parts and took significant labor to install. Walter imagined a lock that required less door preparation and installed quickly, with parts that fit together precisely. His solution was filed in a patent application on April 12, 1920, and would change the industry forever. Compared to the average mortise lock, Walter's lock installed with a quarter of the parts and just 2 small holes, no complicated chiseling. And the entire lock structure was mass-producible, making it faster to manufacture and more consistent in shape and size. Parts would not require hand-fitting or filing. And with the creative application of one of his earlier inventions, Walter realized his new lock could replace the tilting knob lock entirely. He had previously patented an indicating push-button device, now known as a push-in, push-out switch. It can still be seen today in retractable pens. Applying that concept to his lock, Walter developed a simple, effective doorknob that locked with a push of a button, and with just a turn of the knob, it unlocked automatically. Almost immediately, Joseph and the board of directors canceled the tilting knob design and approved a plan to produce the button lock. The next challenge was creating mass production equipment, which would take Walter 2 painstaking years. The company finally began sales in January 1924, producing 391 locks that month. Within a year, they'd grown to 100 employees strong, producing 20,000 locks a month. In 1925, the company reorganized, adopting the name that would become their identity, the Schlage Lock Company. To accommodate the growing demand, Schlage took its biggest risk yet. Their original factory space had reached its limit, so they purchased land in San Francisco's Visitacion Valley to build a new factory. Specially designed, the plant had a sawtooth roof to provide better lighting and ventilation for employees. And the Southern Pacific Railroad even built a special track extension directly to the factory to help speed up shipments. The new plant was dedicated in 1926 in a grand ceremony that included the mayor of San Francisco. Even though business was booming, this growing success could be the company's downfall. Between their land purchase, the new factory, and the increasing number of employees, all their investments added up to a considerable deficit, a debt that would equal more than $1 million today. They were more successful than they could afford to be, and at the current pace, the company would be bankrupt by the end of the year. Reorganizing the company was not an option. The bank was not going to extend another loan. To avoid collapse, the Schlage Lock Company needed a new leader, someone with experience in growing small businesses, someone with the right balance of bold risk-taking and sound financial acumen, someone by the name of Charles Kendrick. A San Francisco native, Charles Kendrick was an influential businessman and civic leader, determined to see his hometown prosper. He graduated from law school, but San Francisco's rapid growth drew him to real estate. He was 30 years old when the earthquake struck.
I was caught in the very vortex of it, and it seemed that I was witnessing the death throes of a great city, the city of my birth. And the farther I walked, the more I felt that the fallen city could never rise again. A great city vanishing in flame. Little wonder that many of those beset by ruin could see no hope, believing that San Francisco would never be again.
After the earthquake, many residents left San Francisco, vowing never to return. But not Charles Kendrick. He was among the first to resume business, opening a real estate office downtown to aid the city's recovery. 20 years later, in 1926, Charles was one of San Francisco's premier business and civic leaders. He transformed a steel wool sponge company from a startup to a household name, built a factory in the city, and served his country in World War I, earning a Purple Heart and Silver Star. His leadership expertise and sterling reputation made him the perfect candidate to save the Schlage Lock Company. When approached by the company's board of directors, Charles agreed to take on management temporarily, just to resolve the crisis. He knew that for his city to grow, San Francisco needed dependable, long-term industry, and Schlage offered both progressive manufacturing and futuristic innovation. Quickly taking charge, he instituted numerous economies and sound business practices, selling surplus equipment, canceling orders for new machinery, and insisting on prompt payments. Within 6 months, the business was back on track, and he was elected president of the company. With Charles and Walter working together, the Schlage Lock Company grew into an increasingly dangerous threat to their competitors. The other major door hardware companies paid little attention to Schlage, figuring it was too small to make a difference. But consumers loved the push-button feature and the smooth, reliable operation. Soon, Schlage locks began appearing on dealer shelves around the country. And when advertisements started listing the upstart company above century-old lock brands, competitors could not ignore Schlage any longer.
The first thing that confronted our growth was an effort by the Big Four to close the market to Schlage locks. The Big Four were Yale, Corbin, Russwin, and Sargent. They ran the builder's hardware business and fought like tigers among themselves, but quickly closed ranks whenever a company threatened their control of the industry. One of them wanted to buy Schlage to get rid of it, having too much invested in mortise locks to let our locks become a competitor.
The Schlage lock had a level of quality that competitors couldn't comprehend. Incredibly thin metal, precisely shaped. Lightweight construction, yet strong. Hollow spindles, allowing room for the mechanisms to support a variety of functions. Walter's innovations were seemingly endless, and other companies had little hope of competing, not with the lock's comprehensive patent protection. In the 1920s, a typical invention was granted an average of 15 claims on a patent. Walter's lock was awarded 45, ensuring Schlage locks would be unrivaled for years to come.
The Big Four threatened to take their entire lines away from their dealers if they promoted the sales of the newfangled Schlage locks. We combated this opposition by selling jobs direct. The salesman sought out some small dealer and gave him orders to fill. Thus, the company rapidly made small dealers into important ones. When the large dealers saw small dealers become competitors through orders for our locks, they decided to sell Schlage products also.
By the fall of 1929, the company's finances had been stable for years. 70% of new homes in San Francisco included Schlage locks, and sales around the country were increasing. And then, the stock market crashed. The ensuing Great Depression threatened the financial stability of the entire nation, including the Schlage Lock Company.
The company overextended its bank credit by about $250,000, a large amount for a small company at this time. To liquidate the frozen credit, the bank urged us to sell out to a large hardware company and went so far as to arrange a meeting. I returned and informed the bank of the ridiculous price the company had offered, and that its president had stated that if he bought Schlage, he would close the plant. Despite this, the bank still urged me to accept. I countered, stating that If further pressed, I would advise the Chamber of Commerce that a young San Francisco company with valuable patents and fine potential was being forced to sell out to one of its competitors who would close the plant. This persuaded the bank to take a more reasonable attitude. Meanwhile, it had become evident that if we were to survive, we would need additional working capital.
To save the Schlage Lock Company, Charles Kendrick put his professional and civic reputation on the line. He worked without compensation and paid the company's bills with his own money. His risk and sacrifice led to success for both him and the business. They had weathered the Great Depression, and that was the last of Schlage's great growing pains. Walter and Charles deeply valued each other's talents and remained an ideal team for the next 20 years, building a full product line: the Standard A-Lock, the B Deadbolt, the C and D heavy-duty locks, and the E entrance trim lock sets. Charles expanded the business internationally, and by 1940, 20% of total sales came from outside the United States. The company's advanced manufacturing capability was called upon by the military in World War II, and Schlage received rare recognition for excellence in wartime production. In the 1950s, the company built a reputation for beautiful custom hardware, offering decorative escutcheons that were both mass-produced and highly customizable. Walter's vision was to continue making innovative devices he could patent and mass-produce. At the time of his unexpected death at the age of 64, over 3 million of his locks were installed on doors throughout the world. He had more door lock patents than any other person, more than 200 globally, a record that would last for decades. In a tribute speech, Charles Kendrick commemorated his dear partner and teammate.
In the passing of Walter Schlage, the West loses a great mechanical genius. He completely revolutionized the whole art of lockmaking. A simple, honest man, he gave no thought to personal praise or profit. In his every waking hour, he was interested solely in his inventions and their perfection. He had a remarkable creative mind which had the faculty of finding a simple solution for any mechanical problem presented to him. His fellow workers will always remember him as a man who understood and sympathized with their problems. His friends knew him as a lovable character whose innate modesty left him entirely unaware of his marvelous genius.
Walter's son Ernest, a Stanford and MIT graduate, assumed engineering leadership at Schlage after his father's death in 1946. He continued inventing new ways to improve lock designs and eventually established the Research Engineering Division with an entire team of inventors who, like Walter, were dedicated to finding simple solutions to problems hidden in plain sight. In 1953, company leadership also transitioned from father to son. Marin Kendrick began in the machine shop, rising through the ranks to become president when his father advanced to chairman of the board. Throughout his tenure, Marin was praised for balancing his disciplined leadership with a sense of family among all employees. Charles passed away in 1970 at the age of 93. He is best remembered in this introduction to his memoirs.
In all his business endeavors, he had to begin at the bottom and build from there. From age 12, when he quit school to make his own way in the world, all that he did had to be done the hard way. Perhaps it was because of this that he rose from obscurity to fame, built enduring civic monuments which perpetuate his memory, amassed the wealth he so generously and widely shared, contributed immensely to the upbuilding of his native city and state. Charles Kendrick takes on the stature of one of San Francisco's most distinguished sons, a man in whom was exemplified the greatness of real goodness and the goodness of real greatness.
Okay.
So I hope you enjoyed it, or whoever is viewing this after the rebroadcast. Am I getting an echo here?
little bit.
Okay, Cynthia, why don't you take over for a second? Let me get my headphones on.
Take over.
Comment. I think we're just give some comments about the context of Slage Lock and Visitation Valley.
When did it close in Visitation Valley?
1990s. I don't remember the exact year, but the 1990s.
Gosh, it's already been 30 years. So were you living in Visitation Valley at the time, Cynthia?
I moved here in 98. So when I got here, it was already closed. The buildings were still there. And that's when the Visitation Valley Planning Alliance got started, because they were going to sell it to Home Depot. And that's sort of the origin of the neighborhood movement, as far as I know. And Russell can certainly add a lot more.
Yeah, that's definitely, it's been closed as long as I've been out here. I think at the time I came out into the neighborhood, it was like maybe a skeleton staff. The buildings are still intact. They're all gone now, except the old office building that they kind of featured in the presentation. But it was, it was still a factory in the sense that if somebody wanted to move in, they could use it. It wasn't like a dilapidated type of building and everything was run down. It just, when they shut it down, and they shut the factory down in Visitation Valley, but the brand is still there. It's made. The company just was bought out over the years, over the decades, and was part of a large international company, Ingersoll Rand, at the time. Now it was spun off of Ingersoll Rand. Allegion, I believe the name of the company. And they put this video together to kind of show to their employees and their stockholders and the people who are invested in their company, the larger company, show about innovation. That you can see in that video how they kept going back to the idea of like adversity, innovation, success. And they were really trying to remind people that even today, that is the DNA of the product. In a way you can say he was sort of like the Steve Jobs of the time. We think of it as a lock, but it was something that there's always been locks. But this one person came and made something that was completely different and changed the whole landscape of lock manufacturing. Same thing with the iPhone. There was phones, there were smart tablets, but Steve Jobs came along and put it all together and completely changed the industry. So you can still buy Schlage locks, and whenever we do events in the public, through the History Project, we always ask people, okay, pull out your key ring. Pretty good chance you have a Schlage lock key on your key ring.
Yeah, exactly.
Houses, not built last week.
Right. I noticed that I live in an old flat in the city, and I was looking at the doorknobs, and I think it comes from that period as well. I'm sure this house was built in the early 1900s. So I was also impressed with the inventor and the management of the company. It seems like it was a great match between the creative mind, and both seem to have a good synergy between each other, really focused on the success of the company. It sounds like a good company to have worked for at that time.
And it seemed like a sort of a not just the management, it was a family, but seemed like the whole workforce was a family that worked together for the good of all.
And just think, if you look at a map of Visitation Valley, how our neighborhood is in relationship to other neighborhoods, that, the Bayview has a really strong industrial section.
Yes.
Visitation Valley doesn't necessarily, other than you had to train S&P specific Bayshore Yards and Schlage Lock kind of basically right on the other side of the wall fence property line to residential neighborhood. So it was really shoehorned in there, but at the time the neighborhood hadn't developed to the extent that you had houses that close. But between those two industries at that time, probably in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, a good majority of the population worked there or were brought out here because of the Schlage Lock Company or the train yards. So the neighborhood really did start to grow up at the time when we had these really good blue collar jobs in the neighborhood. And Leland Avenue is a great example. Leland Avenue thrived during those era because that, you know, people didn't have what we have today. They'd go to the shops after work. They go to the shops on the weekends. They support the local merchants. Local merchants lived in the neighborhood. And that little 2-3 block section of Leland Avenue really was the place to go.
Interesting. I was also, I also noticed how white the workforce is as well, and how the demographics is changing in Visitation Valley.
Yeah. And that also has to do with like just San Francisco. I think sometimes people don't realize that before World War II, that was San Francisco. It was not a diverse city before the war. After the war, it became very diverse. So yeah, leading all up to the 1940s, that was the population of not just Visitation Valley, but a lot of San Francisco, most of San Francisco.
Very interesting. I enjoyed it. Thank you for sharing this video.
Yeah, and it's online if people want to track it down. And Roland, can you still have the link? Maybe you can put it in the chat if people.
Sure.
Well, I guess people won't be able to see the chat, right? If they review this later. So
yeah, well, let's see.
But if you Google it, you Google the name of the video, you can find it on YouTube.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I can even put it. I can put the link in our YouTube channel as well. So
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah, that'll be easy.
Great. Thank you.
So maybe the last part of this is that the factories is all gone. The site will be redeveloped into a mixed use residential commercial neighborhood, sub neighborhood of the Visitation Valley. Been talked about for 15-20 years, but it's hopefully it's going to happen in our lifetime. The only thing that remains on the site now is the old original office building, the corner of Bayshore and Blanken. That building is being renovated as we speak. It's going to be the offices for the development company that's going to build out the site, and it's going to have space for community use on the ground floor. So we hope to see that soon, and maybe in a year, not even a year, hopefully in a couple of months, maybe this summer, it'll be a little bit more active now, and at some point, maybe next year, they'll start actually developing the site.
Right. So it's going to be a mixed use development, which means that there will be housing that the what the community can rent or purchase. How will that work?
Ground floor retail, upper floor residential. So probably, I think they said a mix of apartments and condos that people can purchase. Some
How many? How big is the space? I don't even know what it looks like.
When complete build out, I think it's 16, close to 1,700 units.
Oh my goodness, that's huge. 1,600, 1,700 units?
Yeah, it's about
Oh my goodness.
14, 15 acres. You know, there'll be some taller buildings, maybe I think up to 8 stories is the tallest, maybe 4 to 5 or average. Retail, though, should be a space. There was promised to be a space for a grocery store on the ground floor of one of the buildings. So definitely there are 2 parks, open space also included. Yeah, it's been talked about for several years, decades.
What was the resistance in developing earlier, and why was there resistance to Home Depot?
You got that, Cynthia?
Resistance to Home Depot was that people just saw we're going to have, you know, these massive parking lots and this huge store in the middle of it, and it did nothing for the community except bring more traffic to the valley. I guess it would have provided some jobs, but that's not what people wanted. I mean, we were without a grocery store until like 10 years ago or so with Grocery Outlet. We didn't have a grocery store from 1980s on. We needed things like that, not a huge Home Depot. And that's when the opposition started. And I'm sorry, the other part of that question was?
No, that was the main question, but
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, and it really was a kind a poor use of the site, that it was one 14-acre site and one single use on it. Um, I think even at some point, Home Depot and the company that owned it, Ingersoll Rand, they kind of to see, well, maybe we can do a little more mixed use. So they kind of added some more commercial uses to it. But then that still was like, well, it's such a big site. You can have everything that you have on this plan plus housing. So slowly it got to the point that, okay, well, we see the resistance. There are ideas that are better than just a single use. So it went through another level of community planning. It was a former redevelopment site, San Francisco redevelopment agency site, which had a lot of community input. That kind of almost got to the finish line, but then at the then governor, Jerry Brown, killed redevelopment in California, which shot us dead in the water. So I blame Jerry Brown for not having that site built right now.
well, that's
Oh, and you ask why it's taken so long. One of the main projects, besides the fact that UPC was arguing with Ingersoll Rand and so forth, was that the toxicity of the site after, 80 years of manufacturing with chemicals, it was really toxic.
Did
And
they
so
clean
it's
that
taken,
up?
I'm sorry?
Yeah.
Did they clean that up?
Yes. Well, clean it
Okay.
up to the level that they can develop it. So it'll never be pristine. They just, you can't do that nowadays. But it'll be cleaning up so that they can develop the site. And that was one of the issues that the original property owner wanted to do the Home Depot. Because if they put the Home Depot, they also didn't have to clean up the site. They could have just paved over everything. So
I
that was
see.
also like a quick and easy way of kind of, hey, getting this behind us. So when it morphed from the Home Depot to other ideas, yeah, we have to sit down as a community, the city, the state, really think about how do you clean up the site and do it to the level that people could live there.
Right. Who owns that property or owned? I mean, after Schlage left, so did they sell it to the city or?
No, well, Schlage, when they were purchased by the Ingersoll Rand, the multinational corporation, so they took over all the assets.
Right.
They closed the factory,
Okay.
shipped it out overseas. So they still held the property. So Ingersoll
Okay,
Rand just
I
were
see.
the owner of it. And for them, they're developed their products. They don't build sites. So for
Right.
them, it was just like an albatross around their neck. So they just wanted to get rid of it. Put
Right.
Home
I
Depot
see.
there, be done with it. And Cynthia mentioned UPC, that's Universal Paragon Company. They own the neighboring property in Brisbane, and they sued Ingersoll Rand for contaminating their property. They blocked Ingersoll Rand. So again, that was another several years of legal battles. But ultimately, Universal Paragon, UPC, took ownership of the property as to settle the lawsuit. So they became owners of the property after Ingersoll Rand. So really, over the whole history of the site, it's been owned by Schlage, which was then bought by Ingersoll Rand, and now it's owned by UPC, Universal Paragon.
See, wow, that's really fascinating. I'm. So when is the development supposed to be completed?
5 years ago.
5 years ago,
But I
exactly.
mean, there's 16 to 1700. I mean, it's construction going on this very minute. Massive construction. Yes.
No,
No.
no. They're working on the last remaining building. They're just renovating the office building. The
Okay.
site's been cleared of all the buildings. A lot of the underground work, some of the underground work is sort of laid out, like the grading and getting it ready to build. But there's zero construction on the site now.
Okay.
And the pandemic, I think, threw them off. They said last year that by this time this year, there would have been some vertical construction, but the pandemic, they completely lost that
I see.
past year.
Well, I'm wondering if this is going to happen in my lifetime now. Well, I hope they also considered, green spaces and reasonable parking and pathways to highways, freeway entrances.
There are two open spaces, so there will be two new parks on the site.
Okay, great. And how about getting on the freeway? They're right off of the freeway. That shouldn't be too difficult.
And right on the
Nothing,
railroad line too.
Oh, yes, right.
yeah.
Which
So there will
is a
be
big
like a train
plus.
station, the Bayshore train station right there.
Right.
So
That's going to be a major boom to Visitation Valley once that's built. I mean, just having 1670, that's a community, that's a
yeah,
city
yeah,
within a city.
yeah,
Right.
yeah. We hope so. We hope that it happens in our lifetime.
Mm-hmm. That's exciting. Well, I'm so happy to learn just a little bit more about Visitation Valley. But I do think about the Leland, um, that stretch of, commercial, or commercial spaces. I wish, we could somehow influence the type of businesses that move in there. I'm not sure. I don't know if anyone has thought about what is the resistance other than, well, is it because of the high crime rate? Is it high rent? Who are the landlords? And what's holding people back from opening up a business there, business that the neighbors would want. I mean, to be honest, I'm on the other side, on the west, but I've written to certain businesses and asked them to open up shops at Laurel Village, which is also, affected by vacancy, and some of the storefronts have had multiple businesses over the years. And so, I mean, I know this is controversial because not everyone's a meat eater, but, I don't know if you're familiar with Super Duper, but I have written them twice to open up a shop there, and it's happening now. So I don't know if I had any influence at all because they did not write me back. But it's not the first time I've written a couple of times. I also wrote to the airport, San Francisco, to open up a museum there to use up the space. And I know, once again, I don't know if I had any influence, but they do have, significant art since then. So maybe we should do a campaign of some sort, for the Leland Avenue. If there's a row of businesses, like what exactly do we want there? What kind of restaurants?
Mhm.
What do you think? I mean, I'm not any way associated with the Merchant Association and know nothing about business.
Well, we know the right people for you to talk to in the neighborhood. So we do have folks in the neighborhood who are connected with the merchants who want to work on these type of issues. So we're going to loop you in.
Just one more thing to
Yeah.
put on my plate. But I think if everyone came together and said, we have 2,000 signatures or 100 signatures, and we would like this type of business to come in. But what do you think? Do you think it has to do with the rent, the landlords, or just the location doesn't get enough foot traffic? There's too many homeless people on the block, or?
I mean, personally, it's just difficult to do business in San Francisco for one, and we are at an area that it needs that spark of Slage Lock to really change a little bit of the dynamic. There are businesses that have been on Leland longer than I've been out here, for a generation, and then there's businesses that turn over every so often. So, yeah, it needs maybe a different spark, but we can't
Well,
wait till the Slage Lock gets done to make it happen.
some of the seniors that I've talked to have said that there's really no reason why people from other parts of San Francisco to come to Visitation Valley, because there's no shopping here, there's no theater or anything, so that's why people don't come here. But I think that maybe if we, yeah, like what Edith is saying, there's certain restaurants, certain places that open up on Leland in other parts of Visitation Valley, then at least there's like a Visitation Valley has a showcase.
Mhm.
So people will have a reason to come here on the weekends to shop, to go to restaurants, to watch movies, or we don't have a mall, so
Right.
so maybe a shopping center. that would bring people to Visitation Valley.
So we're working on it.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
just getting that
One good
slage-
restaurant, that's all it takes. One good
Yeah.
restaurant.
Yeah, so the game changer will be the Slage Lock development site. I think that
Mm.
just, you can't bring that many new people in the neighborhood and not have it impact it, positive or negative, but it's going to be an impact. So we're hoping that it's going to be a positive impact.
Sounds good. Well, I think we want to wrap it up now. It's been almost an hour. So thank you once again, Russell and Cynthia, for bringing this video to light. And I hope others will have a chance to view it.
Thank you. We'll be back in 2 weeks, right?
2 weeks, exactly. So
All
that
right.
would be 2 weeks from today, would be the 15th. So
All right.
see you then at noon.
See ya, June 15th. All right, see ya.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.